Hello, my name is Becca. Even though I'm still young, I went through something horrible most people never go through. I was jailed. I was sent away to a juvenile detention center. Now, I'm not trying to make excuses for the things that I have done, but I want to share the traumatic experience I had at such a young age. Let's just say that no teenager should ever have to go through that. My story started when I began taking driving lessons. I was really enjoying my lessons and was always excited for the next lesson to come. My boyfriend Dan was already driving, and he had a really fancy car that his parents had bought him as a gift. Dan was really nice. He drove me to every place you could think of in that car, and I always envied him for having a driving license, unlike me. Only if I knew that my love for that car was going to change my reality. One night, Dan and I were in his car around the neighborhood. I was telling him how much I was fascinated by his car. Dan then offered to let me drive it, but I laughed and said that I wish. But Dan was serious. He said that there was no one around, and just a driver on the block would do no harm. I refused at first, but Dan kept pushing me to do it, so I eventually agreed. And it was awesome. The car ran so smoothly, and I drove around the block like a pro. But it didn't stop there. I wanted more. I took us to another neighborhood, and I was having so much fun. I turned on the music to full volume and smiled and went a bit faster. I took a look at Dan. He was such a wonderful boyfriend, I thought. He looked back at me and smiled. When suddenly we heard a loud sound, and I stopped the car immediately. Oh my God, I thought. I hit something. Dan and I got out quickly. We saw a man lying on the floor. He looked dead. Oh my God, what have I done? I was panicking. I can't even remember much of that night, but I remember that I hurried back into the car with Dan and drove off without thinking. Hours after, police officers were knocking at my door, and that was the night my life went downhill. Even though the man I hit didn't die, I was charged with driving without a license and a hit-and-run attempt. At that point, I had lost all contact with Dan. A couple of months after my 16th birthday, I was sentenced to a year in juvie. It felt like everything was spiraling out of control. I remember them putting me into a bus with a bunch of girls, some older than me, some much younger. It all seemed surreal to me as I stared out of the window. When I first entered the building, I noticed the number of guards standing around. It was unnerving to see them standing with a look on their face like they dared you to step out of line. The line I was in inched closer and closer towards the front until my name was called. I always hated going to the doctor, but this situation was different. They sat me down in a chair and asked question after question, each one more personal than the last. This was done while sitting next to a wide open door, a guard right outside, the line for the next girl not too far away, and other inmates and staff members walking past. To say that I felt exposed was an understatement. All the details of my life were aired out in front of strangers. After the seemingly unending questions, I was given a full examination. I thought the full-body pat-down by the man at the front was bad, but this was more touch, twist, and pull than I was comfortable with. The woman conducting the exam would keep saying, "Hold still," even though she was the one moving me, twisting my body into even more awkward positions, which would cause me to lose my balance. This earned me another stern look and a hard grasp of the shoulders. I was so happy when it was done, thinking that it couldn't get any worse. Then I met my roommate. She was a tall girl who must have been my age or a year older. When I entered, she gave me a look filled with caution and anger. The guard left, and she started to speak. She pointed her finger around the room. "This is my space, and it's been my space for years." Then she pointed to a small corner near the bed. "You can settle for that space over there." Her voice was absolute. She didn't wait for me to answer as she turned her back. I didn't want to cause trouble, so I sat there thinking about what I had gotten myself into and how the time would pass in this miserable place. The time I spent outside of my room was a nightmare. I was always the quiet type. I would rather spend my time alone than in a group. I wish I would have known that in juvie, it was the same as painting a target on your back. I got teased a lot. My things were thrown onto the floor, I was pushed from behind and tripped, punched, and even kicked. The treatment wasn't anything I wasn't used to, so I endured for a while until I had enough. I fought back and immediately got in trouble. The guards didn't help the inmates. Apparently that wasn't their job. Most of the time, they would turn a blind eye until it escalated from a scuffle to a full-out brawl. They seemed to follow a motto: if we don't need to be involved, we won't. If we do need to get involved, you better hope you're not the reason. That's why most fights got resolved between the inmates. When the guards came to pull us apart, they pushed and pulled, then hit us until we complied. It felt worse than the actual fight. One time, I got in trouble with one of the inmates. She was big and strong, and she started attacking me because I didn't want to give her my pillow and blanket. However, things escalated quickly, and I found myself getting into a physical fight with her. She was terrifying, and she was attacking me without even making a notable effort. After a few minutes, something happened that made her go away. She went away. Finally, I thought, but that was when I felt a strong hand on my shoulder, and when I looked behind me, it was another scary inmate. She smiled at me and said, "No worries, sugar, I got you." I told her thanks and was about to walk away, but that's when I felt her pulling my hand aggressively. "What do you want?" I asked her. She said, "I just did you a favor, baby girl. Aren't you planning to return it back?" As she said these words, she started touching me in an uncomfortable way. She had her hands all over my body as if she owned me, and the look in her eyes made me shiver. At some point, I managed to escape her grope and go to my cell. A year after, I was released back into the world. I was 17 years old and close to being free to live my life. It was supposed to be a relief, but I couldn't get my time in there out of my head. Every person I walked past on the street, I saw as an enemy. This only got worse when I was sent back for my last year of school. When people tried to talk to me, I blew them off and walked away. When it was time for lunch, I protected my meal like it was my last, waiting for someone to come and knock it onto the floor. And when people got too close or bumped me, I took it as a threat and immediately became hostile, pushing them away. This was never who I was before. Yes, I was a loner with antisocial tendencies, but never violent for no reason. I didn't like living in fear, not knowing when the next attack or insult would come. I didn't know who to turn to, thinking that everyone wanted something from me that I didn't have or wasn't willing to give. I was broken. When my probation officer learned of my school habits, he suggested counseling. I thought it was embarrassing and unnecessary, but it ended up saving my life. After such a hard road, it was good to get those emotions out in the open and to feel truly free of that place.